They always said they loved both of us equally, until the day they decided his future mattered more than my life. My name is Harper Olin. And the moment I realized my life meant nothing to my parents was the moment I almost lost it for good. It started with the beeping of a heart monitor, a sterile white ceiling, the unmistakable scent of antiseptic. My mouth was dry throat, raw body heavy like lead. I tried to move, I couldn't. I blinked and pain exploded across my torso. That's when it hit me. I was in a hospital and something had gone terribly wrong. A nurse noticed my movement and rushed out. Moments later, my parents entered, but there were no tears of relief, no trembling hands reaching for mine. Just irritation, exhaustion, like I had inconvenienced them. Like I was a burden they didn't sign up for. "She's awake," my mother said flatly. Not to me, to the doctor. My father didn't look at me. Just stood there, stiff arms crossed. Not once did he ask how I felt. Not once did he meet my eyes. The doctor approached gently. "Harper, you've been through a major trauma, a car accident. You've lost a kidney, but you're stable now. We did everything we could to save you." I wanted to speak, to ask about my brother Carson. He had been driving, but all I managed was a pained groan. The nurse slipped ice chips between my lips. My mother finally answered without emotion. "He's fine, just a few scratches. You'll be here for a while." There was something in her tone, not concern, not even coldness, just indifference, like I was a tool that had malfunctioned. And just like that, I knew. Something inside me shattered. This wasn't a story about a tragic accident and a grateful recovery. This was something much darker. Something that hadn't even begun yet. Days passed in a blur of IV bags and pain meds. I lay in that bed staring at the ceiling, wondering why Carson hadn't visited. Why my parents never stayed more than 10 minutes. I told myself they were in shock, processing everything. Maybe they felt guilty about the crash. Maybe they didn't know how to talk about it. I was wrong. One night I couldn't sleep. The room was too cold and the pain in my side wouldn't let me rest. I heard footsteps outside my door. Voices. Muffled but familiar. My parents. And then I heard it. "So you're saying if we take her other kidney?" my mother whispered. A pause. Then the doctor replied, shocked. "She wouldn't survive that. She's already lost one. Removing the second would, but Carson needs it." My father interrupted. "He has a future. She's just, well, look at her. She's weak. She doesn't know what she wants. She'll never run, never carry a child. This would mean something." And my mother, sharp and cold, she'd be doing something useful for once. My breath caught in my throat. I froze beneath my thin hospital blanket. They weren't here to support me. They weren't worried about my recovery. They were trying to trade my life for Carson's convenience. I was 17, broken, strapped to a bed, and my own parents were negotiating my death like it was a business transaction. If you've ever been in a moment where your body screamed while your voice was silenced, if you've ever felt invisible to the very people who should protect you, leave a like. Let me know where you're watching this from, because you're not alone, and I need you to stay with me as I tell you what happened next. That night, something inside me ignited. Not fear, not entirely. It was resolve. If they wouldn't protect me, I would. If they thought I was disposable, I'd prove otherwise. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment I started writing my own. To be continued. Before I was Harper Olin, the girl with scars and steel in her voice, I was Harper Quinn, the quiet one. The spare. The one who never caused trouble, never spoke too loud, never demanded space. I grew up in Cedar Falls, a town so small everyone knows each other's secrets, or at least pretends not to. My parents, Diane and Martin Quinn, weren't bad people by most accounts. They were respected in town. My dad taught American history at the local college. My mom ran the church daycare program. the kind of parents who baked cookies for fundraisers and nodded politely at parent-teacher conferences. But there were two very different versions of good parenting in our house, one for Carson and one for me. Carson was born first, and he was everything they ever wanted. Quarterback in high school, National Honor Society. He once gave a speech at the county fair, and my mom cried like he'd just delivered the Gettysburg Address. And me, I was around. I got straight A's too, but that didn't warrant more than a good job without looking up from their phones. I played cello for 6 years. They never came to a recital. When I placed third in the state science fair, they forgot to attend the awards night. But when Carson broke a finger in practice, full-blown emergency. My mom left work early. My dad canceled class. The house became a shrine of ice packs and sympathy. I learned early that silence kept the peace. If I didn't rock the boat, maybe I wouldn't sink. So I faded. I stayed out of the way. I cleaned up after their arguments. I covered for Carson when he missed curfews. I helped him with college applications no one ever thanked me for. But I never expected it to go this far. I never thought being invisible would make me expendable. After the accident, when I lay in that bed with machines humming beside me, I kept replaying the years before, all the moments that seemed small, but weren't. The missed birthdays. The way they only took pictures of Carson at Thanksgiving. The fact that they never bothered to learn my favorite food but knew his coffee order down to the brand of cream. It wasn't just favoritism, it was erasure. And when I overheard them planning to take the last organ that kept me alive, I realized they didn't see me as their daughter at all. I was a resource, a backup plan. But here's the thing, I wasn't going to let them make that choice for me. I started small. The next morning, when the nurse brought in pain meds and adjusted my chart, I asked if she could check something for me. I told her as calmly as I could that I didn't feel safe. She paused. Something flickered in her eyes. That small pause told me everything. I wasn't imagining this. Something about my voice, the way I said it, told her this wasn't about recovery anymore. It was about survival. If you've ever had to pretend you were fine just to keep peace in your own family, if you've ever had to swallow your pain just to be the good kid, tell me in the comments, what did they never see in you? I read every story. Because your silence doesn't make you invisible. The nurse returned later with someone new, a hospital social worker named Ms. Anita Wells. She was small, soft-spoken, maybe in her 50s, with tired but kind eyes. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She let me talk. And for the first time in my life, I told someone everything. Slowly, trembling, but clear. About Carson, about my parents, about what I heard outside my door. Ms. Wells didn't interrupt. She didn't look shocked. She looked resolute. "We're going to help you," she said quietly, "but we'll need to move quickly." That was the moment I stopped being just a girl. I was becoming a survivor with a voice. And even though I was still hooked to machines, still bruised, still barely strong enough to lift my arm, I knew that every breath I took was now mine alone. I wouldn't be a sacrifice. I wouldn't be quiet anymore, because even invisible daughters deserve to live. The hospital became a battlefield I never expected to fight on. After my talk with Ms. Wells, things started shifting fast. Faster than I could emotionally process. One minute I was just a patient in a quiet recovery room. The next I was suddenly someone under protection. Someone being moved not for treatment, but for my own safety. The hospital filed an official ethics complaint. Ms. Wells and the hospital legal team gathered what they needed: my medical records, witness statements from 2 nurses, and most crucially, audio logs from a hallway security recording system that had picked up the muffled conversation outside my door. That file, that was my lifeline. Turns out what my parents said that night wasn't just monstrous, it was illegal. You can't barter your minor child's life even under the guise of saving a sibling. You especially can't do it without the child's consent or without a shred of medical justification. But the fact that they tried, that they framed it like I had no say, no value, that was a betrayal no scalpel could fix. When the ethics board ruled in my favor, they enacted a protective order on my hospital room. Suddenly, my parents couldn't access my charts, couldn't speak to my doctors, couldn't even step past the front desk without clearance. And I was terrified. Terrified, but free. For the first time in my life, I wasn't under their shadow. I wasn't answering to anyone. I wasn't the quiet one cleaning up Carson's mess. I was Harper. Just Harper. And I was going to decide what came next. I remember lying there the night after the court documents were processed, my arms still sore from IVs, but my heart racing for an entirely different reason. I stared at the ceiling for hours trying to feel something. Anger, relief, gratitude. But mostly, I felt hollow. How do you process the idea that the people who raised you wanted to erase you? And then came the storm. It was around noon when I heard it. My mother's voice, unmistakable, echoing down the corridor, shrill and cracking. "She's our daughter. You can't keep her from us." Then my father, colder. "This is brainwashing. This is some legal overreach. Our son is dying and they're protecting the wrong child." They were outside the nurses' station demanding access. They hadn't even asked how I was doing. Not once. It was about control, reputation, power. I watched from behind the curtain as security calmly approached, escorted them out of the ward. I'll never forget the way my mother turned back, pointing her finger at the nurse's desk like it was the enemy. And I'll never forget how no one flinched. No one sided with her. I didn't belong to them anymore. Not after what they said. Not after what they tried to do. That night, 2 nurses I'd never spoken to slipped into my room. One of them, her voice trembling, said, "We heard what happened. We're so sorry." She placed her hand gently on mine, and the warmth of that moment, the human acknowledgement that I mattered, it undid me more than anything my parents had ever said. If you've ever been made to feel small in your own family, if you've ever had to fight for your right to exist, not thrive, just exist, tell me what got you through. What moment reminded you I deserve to be here? Drop it in the comments. I promise I'll read everyone. Because sometimes survival begins with someone simply saying, "You matter." The next morning, Ms. Wells returned with an update. "We found a foster placement. It's small, but it's safe. And they've agreed to let you finish high school remotely while you recover." I nodded. Slowly. My voice came out raspy, but sure, I don't want to be Harper Quinn anymore. She blinked. I added, "I want to change my name. Something new. Something that has no ties to them." Ms. Wells smiled for the first time since we met. "We can do that." So I chose Harper Olin, my great-grandmother's maiden name. A woman I'd never met but heard was strong, stubborn, and no one's second choice. And just like that, the girl on the hospital bed died quietly. In her place, someone else started to rise. The first night in my new foster placement felt quieter than death. I was moved in a nondescript van driven by a woman named Candace from social services who smelled faintly of cinnamon and wore her silence like armor. She didn't ask questions. I didn't offer answers. We both understood the kind of fragile that doesn't need explaining. The apartment was on the edge of town, not the nice side, but not the worst either. Beige carpet, flickering hallway light, the buzz of an old fridge in the background. My room was small, twin mattress, secondhand dresser, a single window with a view of a parking lot. But it was mine. No family portraits glaring down from the wall. No voices from another room arguing about who gets what. No lies disguised as concern. Just me. A name I chose. A door I could close. And silence, not the dangerous kind this time, but the healing kind. My foster mother was a woman named Maria Ortega. Early 60s, short gray curls, ex-nurse. She was the first adult to look at me and not see damage or paperwork. Just a girl who needed space. And that's what she gave me. She didn't pry, just knocked gently on my door that first night and left a cup of warm tea outside. No words, no pressure. It made me cry harder than anything else. I spent the first 2 weeks in recovery mode physically and emotionally. My incision ached. I moved slow. I still woke up in cold sweats, expecting to hear my mother's voice outside the door demanding my organs be harvested like vegetables. But no one came. No one barged in. No one made me feel less than human. When the doctor signed off on my release, Maria drove me to the pharmacy herself. She waited patiently while I picked out shampoo and toothpaste, the brands I wanted, not the ones someone else bought in bulk. She even let me linger in the snack aisle for 10 full minutes, just staring at choices. You don't realize how much control you've never had, until someone gives you a little. I enrolled in an online high school program 2 towns over. It wasn't prestigious. There was no ceremony, no pep rallies, no yearbook. Just modules and deadlines. But I liked the clarity. For once, I wasn't being compared to Carson. No one was waiting to see if I'd fail or fade. It was just me showing up for myself. I got a part-time job at a local bookstore downtown. It smelled like dust and old paper, and the owner, Mr. Davis, was the kind of grumpy that secretly meant well. He didn't ask why a girl with tired eyes and a fresh scar wanted to work weekends. He just said, "Don't steal the romance novels. They're for paying customers." I laughed for the first time in months, and that's when I realized something vital. Healing doesn't come in waves. It comes in crumbs, in safe silences, in cups of tea and creaky floorboards, and someone leaving the hallway light on just in case you're afraid of the dark. If you've ever had to start over, truly start from scratch with nothing but your name and a sliver of hope. Tell me in the comments, what was the first tiny thing that made you believe you might be okay? Because sometimes surviving isn't loud, it's in the quiet choice to keep going. I stopped looking for my parents to call. I didn't expect a letter. I didn't even Google Carson's name. That chapter had been burned. I wasn't living in their shadow anymore. I was building something they never believed I could. A life, a self, a future. And somewhere between the shelves of paperbacks and early morning lesson plans, I found my voice again. I never set out to be successful. I just didn't want to be helpless anymore. At 18, with a GED in one hand and a worn-out library card in the other, I applied for a receptionist job at a medical technology startup called Mira Labs. The office was tucked inside a repurposed warehouse, its walls half-painted and the furniture clearly donated. But the people were kind. The work was steady. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere that didn't come with conditions. My job was simple: answer phones, schedule appointments, refill coffee. But I paid attention. Every time the engineers explained something about blood filtration prototypes, I took notes. I read every white paper they printed and left lying around. I stayed late, asked questions, and slowly, day by day, I learned. The COO at the time, a woman named Elise Park, once asked me why I stayed after hours reading product trials. I told her, because if you're going to save lives, someone has to understand why. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once. That conversation changed my trajectory. Within a year, I was promoted to office operations. 2 years later, I was overseeing vendor contracts, project budgets, and hiring processes. I'd found my strength not in big speeches or flashy titles, but in structure. In watching a chaotic system and quietly making it work. Mira Labs was building a revolutionary dialysis support platform for patients with organ failure, and I was helping shape the very system that once upon a time I was almost sacrificed to. Talk about full circle. At 22, I was promoted to head of operations. At 24, I became partial owner. And not once did I ask anyone for help tied to my last name. No favors, no shortcuts, no connections. I wanted every brick in this life to be laid by my own hands. But here's the thing about the past: it never really goes away. It waits. It bides time. And sometimes, it shows up in your inbox. I remember that morning like it was yesterday. I was sitting at my desk sipping burnt coffee and skimming through executive applications for a newly opened department head role. I was barely halfway through the list when I saw it. Carson Quinn, my brother. I hadn't seen that name in 7 years. And there it was, in bold font, sitting casually between an MBA graduate and a former hospital administrator. I stared at the resume, my hand frozen over the mouse. My heart wasn't racing. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. A strange, calm confirmation that the universe had decided it was time. He didn't know who I was anymore. I'd changed my name. Changed everything. As far as he and my parents were concerned, I had either died or disappeared into some foster care abyss. He had no idea I was the gatekeeper now. And for the first time, I realized I had the power to choose how this story would end. If you've ever found yourself staring at a name, a message, a memory from the past that once broke you, and now you're the one holding the pen, tell me in the comments, what would you do? Would you open that door? Or close it for good? I requested a face-to-face interview. The next morning, HR confirmed Carson had accepted. He'd be arriving Friday. He had no idea the girl he thought would never matter was now the woman deciding his future. Friday came with the kind of calm that feels manufactured, like the air itself was holding its breath. I arrived at the Mira Labs headquarters an hour early. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to sit at the head of the conference table and take it all in. The skyline outside shimmered in the morning haze. The glass walls reflected my suit, navy sharp lines, no trace of the girl who once lay in a hospital bed, wondering if she'd ever breathe without pain. At exactly 9:03 a.m., Carson walked through the door. He didn't recognize me at first. He saw the company logo, the high-rise floors, the sleek furniture. He was clearly nervous, but carried the bravado of someone who'd always been told he was enough just for showing up. And then his eyes landed on me. I watched the recognition slide over his face like ice melting. His mouth dropped open. His fingers clutched the strap of his briefcase like it might hold him up. "You," he stammered. "You're alive," I finished, voice calm. "Surprise." He blinked hard as if I might vanish if he didn't stare. I gestured toward the seat across from mine. "Have a seat, Carson." He moved slowly, carefully, like I was some dream he wasn't sure how to interpret yet. I didn't know," I thought. "You thought I disappeared? You thought Mom and Dad got what they wanted?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. "You thought wrong." He looked down, shame starting to crack through his mask. "I didn't know what they said. I wasn't a part of that." I raised an eyebrow. "You were part of everything. You just didn't pay attention to what it cost." He tried to smile. "Look, Harper." "Harper Olin," I corrected. "Right. Olin. I didn't come here for drama. I came for a job." I didn't know that I'd be the one reading your resume. I slid it across the table. That I'd be in the position to decide if you get to rebuild your life the same way I had to rebuild mine from dust and court records. His voice trembled. I need a second chance." I leaned forward slowly, my tone soft but razor sharp. A second chance, like the one I was almost denied when our parents tried to trade my life for your kidney transplant evaluation. That kind of second chance. His eyes filled with something: guilt, fear, regret. It didn't matter. The ink was already dry on the past. And this was my moment. If you've ever been face to face with someone who once made you feel disposable, and you finally had the power to say no, would you take it? Would you forgive them? Or remind them who they left behind? Let me know. I'm listening. I stood up, walked to the window behind me, hands in my pockets. "Do you know what it's like, Carson? To hear your own parents say out loud that your life is less valuable than your brother's?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I turned to face him. "You weren't in that hallway, but you were always in that dynamic. You were the reason I was nothing to them. You got all the praise, all the plans, all the love. I was the backup plan in case you broke." He opened his mouth, closed it. "This company doesn't just build tech," I said. "It builds systems of fairness, integrity, survival. And I've made sure our values are more than a mission statement." He swallowed. "So, what happens now?" I looked him in the eye, That depends. Are you ready to admit you've been standing on a pedestal built from someone else's silence? He didn't speak, just nodded barely. Good, I said, because your interview's not over. Not yet. I sat back down slowly, giving Carson just enough time to squirm under the weight of his own silence. The resume in front of me felt like a prop, meaningless considering the history we shared, but I still tapped it once deliberately. Your academic record is average, I said. Your experience is thin, but the entitlement, that's fully intact. He winced. I didn't come here expecting favors, Harper. It's Olin, I said again, sharper now. And this isn't about favors. This is about consequences. I opened the manila folder in front of me, even though I already knew what was inside. Copies of the hospital complaint, the social worker's affidavit, a signed statement from the ethics board. All of it legally archived, all of it sealed except by me. Do you know what this is? I asked. He stared at the pages. No. This is the paper trail of what our parents tried to do to me, I said. What they never got punished for. What no one else but me had to live through. It's the reason I changed my name. The reason I built everything in this company from the ground up without asking anyone to understand. Because no one wanted to understand. He shifted in his chair. I was 17. I didn't know what they said. I wasn't part of that conversation. No, I said quietly, but you were part of the system. The one where I had to be useful to matter, where being your sister meant I was only valuable if I could bleed for you. He looked away. For a second I thought he might cry, but tears were cheap currency and I wasn't accepting them. I paused. Let the silence thicken. Then, I created a policy here, Carson, I said. One that protects employees and candidates who've survived familial neglect or betrayal. A policy that ensures no one like me ever walks into a company and finds the person who destroyed them waiting on the other side of the interview table. He blinked. Wait. You built that? Yes, because trauma doesn't disappear when you get a paycheck, I said. And forgiveness doesn't mean hiring the person who would have let you die if it made things easier. He opened his mouth. I raised a hand. You don't get to explain anymore. His eyes widened, panicked. Please, you don't know what it's been like. I'm out of work. I have no health insurance. I'm trying to fix my life. I leaned in. So was I. With one kidney, a fake last name, and no family. But you never checked in, never asked where I went. You all just moved on. He swallowed hard. You're ruining my life. I tilted my head. Oh, I said, voice soft and even. You mean like how you all tried to ruin mine when you sat back and said nothing while they offered up my body like a spare part. His face turned red. You always played the victim. No, Carson. I leaned forward. I was the victim. Now I'm the one writing the ending. And then I stood. Calm, composed, and final. You're not just rejected, Carson. You're blacklisted. Not just here, but at every firm we partner with. I already sent the notice. He shot to his feet. You're serious? I nodded. Dead serious. And for the first time, he understood that the sister he ignored, the one he almost let die, now held every key he once thought was his birthright. If you've ever had to make the hardest decision not out of anger, but out of survival, would you let the past walk through your door, or would you finally shut it for good? Tell me. I want to hear your story. He stormed out. I didn't watch him go, because this story wasn't about his ending anymore. It was about mine. The door closed behind Carson with a soft click that echoed louder than his shouting ever could. I stood in the conference room for a while longer, letting the silence settle like dust after a storm. The morning sun poured in through the glass wall, casting a golden line across the table, where his resume still sat now, just a relic of a chapter I'd finally closed. I picked it up, held it between my fingers for a second, then slowly slid it into the shredder beside the filing cabinet. The soft grind of paper being torn apart was satisfying. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I needed that sound proof that some things could be destroyed without destroying me. I went back to my office. My assistant looked up but didn't ask. No one did. The staff knew something had happened, but they respected my space, something my own family never did. I sat at my desk, logged back in, and went about my day like I hadn't just erased the last remnant of a family that once offered me up like a pawn. That evening, as I walked home through the crisp air of downtown Cedar Falls, I passed the bookstore where I used to work. The same faded awning, the same tinkling doorbell. Mr. Davis had retired by now, but the new owner had kept everything intact. Even the handwritten mystery 2-for-1 sign I had created years ago was still taped crooked on the back shelf. I stood outside for a while, watching a young girl inside browsing with a backpack slung over one shoulder. She reminded me of myself, quiet, observant, carrying weight no one else could see. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt proud, because she'd grow up in a world I was helping shape. A world where girls like us weren't told to be quiet or selfless or useful to others before we were useful to ourselves. A world where we didn't have to be broken to be seen. I turned the corner and made my way back to my apartment, not a penthouse, not a mansion, just a modest space with a view of the lake and a balcony barely big enough for one chair. But it was mine, earned, untouched by the shadows of anyone else's expectations. I poured myself a cup of tea, settled into the balcony chair, and opened the email I'd been sitting on for 3 days. It was from the hospital. They were launching a national campaign focused on the ethical protection of minors in medical crisis, particularly when families attempted to coerce or override consent in organ-related decisions. They were calling it the Harper-Olin Protocol. I blinked. Let the weight of those words sink in. They weren't just honoring what I'd survived, they were turning it into policy. Protection. Change. If you've ever been through something horrific and wondered if it would ever mean anything, know this: your pain doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be someone else's beginning. Comment if you've ever seen your scars become someone else's light. I'm listening. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Not because things were perfect, not because the past was erased, but because I knew finally fully that I had rewritten the ending. On my terms, without their permission. A week later, a letter arrived. No return address, no typed label. Just my name, Harper Olin, written in familiar, jagged handwriting. My mother's. I stared at it for a long time. The envelope sat unopened on my kitchen table while I made coffee, checked email, watered the plant I'd somehow managed to keep alive for a whole year. But my eyes kept drifting back to it like a wound that hadn't fully closed. I knew what it was before I even touched it. Not because I expected an apology, but because people like my parents don't write unless they want something. I opened it with steady hands. Inside a folded piece of lined paper, cheap ink, no salutation, no warmth. We're in trouble. The house is in foreclosure. Carson hasn't found work since the layoffs. Your father's pension isn't enough. I know you're doing well. Please. We're still your parents. Help us. As a daughter. That was it. No mention of the hospital. No acknowledgement of the choice they tried to make. No admission of what they said that night outside my room. Just desperation cloaked in entitlement. As if being my parents in biology alone was a golden ticket to my forgiveness. I stood in my small kitchen, sunlight slanting across the tile floor, and felt absolutely nothing. Not rage, not satisfaction, just finality. I took out a pen and one sheet of crisp white paper, my own name embossed at the top. Simple. Clear. I wrote, I was your daughter. When I was 17, unconscious in a hospital bed, fighting to live. You made your choice. Now live with it. And that was all. No signature. No return address. I folded it, sealed the envelope, and dropped it in the mailbox that afternoon without hesitation. As I walked back to my apartment, something in my chest shifted, not closure exactly, but a kind of quiet understanding. I didn't need to rage. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Because survival isn't about who you walk away from. It's about who you choose not to become. If you've ever had to say no to people who once defined your entire world, Tell me in the comments, what gave you the strength to do it? What was the final straw? Your story matters, and it might just help someone else find the courage to write theirs. That night, I sat on my balcony watching the lake shimmer beneath a blanket of stars. I drank tea from the same chipped mug I'd bought when I first moved in, not because I couldn't afford a new one, but because it reminded me where I started, where I rebuilt. And just before bed, I lit a candle for the girl I used to be, the one they tried to erase. But she didn't vanish. She evolved. Sometimes people ask me how I survived it all. Not just the accident, not just the betrayal, but the whole damn arc, the erasure, the silence, the way my own parents looked at me like a spare part instead of a daughter. And I tell them I didn't survive because I was strong. I survived because I decided I had to be. Because the alternative was to let them win. Let them define me by what they were willing to throw away. Let their story be the only one told. But here's what they never understood. Even a discarded seed knows how to root itself in the dark. After I sent that letter, I kept going, quietly, steadily. I continued working at Mirror Labs not just as an executive, but as a mentor. I started carving out time every Friday afternoon to meet with younger employees, especially women, and especially those who had a past they didn't speak about easily. Abuse survivors, foster care grads, people rebuilding from ash. I didn't give them advice. I just listened. Because that's what I'd needed, once someone to look me in the eye and say, "You're not crazy, and you're not alone." The company thrived. We landed a contract with the state medical board. Our platform was adopted across 5 hospital networks. And through it all, I kept a copy of that original social worker's letter, the one that triggered my legal emancipation, framed on my office wall. Not because I needed the reminder of what was taken from me, but because I never wanted to forget what I took back. One day, a journalist interviewed me for a piece about ethical tech leadership. She asked about the policy I'd created, the one protecting candidates from family-related discrimination or exploitation. And she said, almost in passing, "You seem like someone who's seen both sides of the system. What would you tell the version of yourself from 10 years ago?" I paused for a moment, then answered, "I'd tell her she doesn't have to earn her place at the table with blood, that her value isn't up for debate, and that love, real love, never asks you to disappear so someone else can shine. If you've ever had to teach yourself your own worth, share with me. What was the moment you realized your story belonged to you? Because I promise someone out there needs to hear it." Late that night, after the article went live, I sat by the lake again. No headlines, no noise, just the soft ripple of water and the distant hum of life moving forward. I touched the scar on my side, faint now, barely visible, and smiled. They thought that would be the end of me, but it wasn't. It was the moment I began again. I thought the past had run out of surprises for me. But life, I've learned, has a way of circling back, not always with knives, but sometimes with something more complicated, an open door you never asked for, held by a hand you swore you'd never take again. It started with an email. Subject line from Carson, 2 words. One ghost. For a moment, I debated deleting it outright. But curiosity is a dangerous kind of gravity. I clicked. "Harper, I know I don't deserve a response. I messed up more than I probably even understand. But I've been sober for 11 months. I've started therapy. I volunteer now at the same hospital that treated you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. You changed me." See, there was no ask, no follow-up, no manipulative hook. Just a note that read more like a whisper than a plea. I sat there staring at it, the glow of my laptop screen bouncing off the window as dusk fell over the city. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel warmth either. Just stillness. Like standing at the edge of a bridge you never plan to cross but can't help but stare across anyway. That weekend, I visited the hospital for a donor summit I'd been invited to speak at. After my presentation on ethical protocol design, a nurse approached me, young, blonde, nerves fluttering in her hands. "You're Harper Olin," she asked, almost breathless. "I am," I just wanted to say, Carson's been working with our pediatric patients. He reads to the kids, never talks about himself. But when we found out who his sister was, we understood why he doesn't. I didn't respond right away. Because what do you say to something like that? Forgiveness is a strange country. Some people move there, live in it, plant flowers. Me, I visit sometimes. I send postcards. But I don't stay. Later that night, I sat down to write Carson back. Not much. Just this. I'm glad you're trying. But healing doesn't equal return. Keep doing the work for yourself, not for what you lost. And I sent it. If you've ever had someone from your past show up with an apology, what did you do with it? Accept it, acknowledge it, or file it away as a reminder of how far you've come. Leave a comment. You never know who your boundary might empower. That message was the last we exchanged. I didn't block him, but I didn't invite him in either. Because you can honor someone's growth without making space for them in the home you built from surviving them. And that more than anything is peace. The more distance I put between myself and my past, the more I realized what happened to me wasn't just a family tragedy. It was systemic. In the months following Carson's letter, I threw myself deeper into policy work. Not out of vengeance, but because I saw how many others were still trapped in stories they didn't know how to rewrite. I met with survivors, girls and boys who, like me, had been pressured by family to donate, sacrifice, obey. Kids who were told that love meant compliance, that loyalty meant silence, that their bodies were community property if it helped someone more important. It enraged me, but more than that, it clarified my mission. Through Mira Labs, I began spearheading a collaborative initiative with a coalition of ethics boards, child advocacy lawyers, and hospital administrators across 5 states. We called it the Boundaries Act, a legislative proposal that would guarantee medical privacy rights to minors in cases of suspected familial coercion. No more whispered deals in cold hallways. No more "she's just a girl" justifications. No more parents deciding whose life mattered more. The bill was met with resistance, of course. People asked, but what about families trying to do what's best? And I answered calmly, the best doesn't start with betrayal. It starts with consent. I testified before committees. I was called brave by some and dangerous by others. A few conservative outlets accused me of dismantling the family unit. But I didn't care. Because if your family requires you to disappear to stay whole, it was never whole to begin with. By the end of the legislative season, the Boundaries Act passed in 2 states. 3 more placed it under review. And we were just getting started. During an interview with a local news station, a reporter asked me, "Harper, you've turned your trauma into policy. What's next for you personally?" I smiled and said, "Peace. That's all I ever wanted." She tilted her head. "And have you found it?" I thought for a second, then answered, "I think peace is like sunlight. It's not always warm, but it's yours. You step into it. You protect it. And when someone tries to block it, you move away, not backward. If you've ever turned pain into something that helps others, tell me, what did you build from the pieces? A boundary, a law, a life. Because your strength isn't selfish, it's contagious." After that segment aired, my inbox flooded with letters from social workers, from teens, from ICU nurses. One came from a girl named Lily, 16 years old, in foster care in Kansas. She wrote, "They told me I had to give up part of myself to be loved, but then I heard your voice on TV, and now I know I don't owe anyone my body to be worth something." I read that sentence again and again, and for the first time in my life, I wept not for what had been done to me, but for what wasn't going to be done to someone else. The invitation came in a cream-colored envelope. No logo, no flashy seal, just my name handwritten in delicate script, the kind of penmanship that felt out of place in a digital world. I assumed it was another fundraiser, maybe an award event. These things had become routine since the Boundaries Act passed in 2 states. But when I opened the envelope and saw who signed it, my breath caught. Elaine Quinn, my grandmother, my mother's mother. I hadn't heard that name in almost a decade. She'd gone quiet during the whole family fallout, never called, never wrote, never visited. I assumed she'd taken their side or simply didn't want to choose. But now, out of nowhere, she was inviting me to an annual charity gala hosted by her foundation, the Quinn Women's Fund for Youth Health Equity. There was a handwritten note tucked inside. I know I don't deserve your presence, but I want you to see something. Something I should have done a long time ago. Elaine. I sat with that card for hours. I didn't owe her anything. Not my time. Not my appearance. Not the version of myself she clearly missed watching grow up. But something in me, call it curiosity, call it the smallest flicker of unfinished business, whispered go. So I did. The night of the gala, I wore a black dress. Simple, clean, powerful. I didn't walk in like a granddaughter hoping for reconciliation. I walked in like a woman who had built her life from the debris of people who left her behind. The room was warm, glittering with polite applause and polished glasses. I spotted Elaine near the front, thinner than I remembered, but still composed, lips drawn tight like someone holding back a lifetime of words. She didn't approach me until after the awards were handed out. When she did, she didn't hug me, didn't cry. She simply said, "Come with me." We walked through a side corridor into a smaller wing of the building. There, mounted on the wall in a gold-trimmed plaque, was something that made me stop breathing. The Harper Olin Fellowship for Ethical Medical Reform, founded by the Quinn Women's Fund, sponsored anonymously, dedicated to survivors who transform injustice into justice. My name. On their wall. She looked at me with clear, unwavering eyes. I knew, she said softly. Not all of it. But enough. I didn't speak up. I was afraid. Of your mother. Of destroying the image. Of admitting what I knew to be true. I thought staying silent was neutral. But silence chooses a side. I didn't speak. Not because I hadn't forgiven her, but because I didn't need her apology to move forward. Still, hearing it mattered. You changed everything, Harper, she said. You didn't just survive them. You outlived their power. If someone in your life ever stayed silent when you needed them most, did their apology ever come? And if it did, what did it mean to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because your voice deserves the space theirs once stole. Elaine asked if I would pose for a photo near the plaque. I agreed. Not for her. For every girl who walks by it one day, sees the name, and thinks, if she did it, maybe I can too. People often assume that once you win, once the trauma is acknowledged, the name is honored and the apology is given, the story wraps itself in a bow. But healing isn't a headline. It's what happens after the applause fades. It's in the decisions you make quietly when no one's watching. And for me, those decisions were the most important ones I'd ever made. After the gala, I didn't go out celebrating. I went home, took off the heels, washed my face, made a grilled cheese, and sat on the floor of my apartment, the same one I'd lived in for 5 years. The awards, the fellowships, the plaques on marble walls, they were important. Necessary even. But they weren't home. This apartment was. It had stains in the carpet and a stubborn kitchen faucet that dripped whenever the weather turned. But it was mine. And when I curled up that night under a blanket my foster mother once gave me, I realized something I hadn't dared say out loud. I was no longer surviving. I was living. In the spring, I adopted a dog, a shepherd lab mix named Clover, who barked at delivery trucks and slept with her head on my pillow like a person. I planted herbs on the balcony and burned incense I once thought too expensive. I started taking a pottery class. I even laughed when my first bowl came out shaped like a lopsided hat. I reconnected with Maria, my former foster mom, over coffee. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about retirement plans, her new obsession with puzzle books, and whether I was dating anyone. I wasn't. But not because I was closed off. I just didn't need someone to complete me anymore. I was already whole. Mira Labs offered to expand my role into national outreach. I said no. Not because I was afraid, but because I finally knew what enough looked like. If you've ever reached a point where peace mattered more than prestige, tell me, what boundary did you draw that made you feel like you finally came home to yourself? I'd love to hear it. Because arriving is just as sacred as surviving. One evening, I got a text from Judith, the hospital social worker, who'd once sat by my bed with a notepad and a promise. Saw your fellowship plaque. You did good, kid. Proud of you. And that's when the tears came. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I chose every quiet, stubborn, revolutionary step of the way. Looking back now, I don't see a single story. I see many. There was the girl in the hospital bed, voiceless, half alive, with her future being debated in whispers outside her door. There was the teenager in foster care taping job applications together with hope and bruises she never explained. There was the woman sitting at the head of a boardroom table, staring down the brother who once stood on the bones of her silence. And there's me now, Harper Olin. Not someone who rose above, not a poster child for resilience, just a woman who refused to be erased. I used to think healing would feel like fireworks, but it's quieter than that. It's the peace of reading a book in bed with a dog breathing against your ribs. It's drinking your favorite tea without checking the price tag. It's saying no to people who once taught you that love means giving them everything. It's still being here. Because I was supposed to be gone. My parents said it outright. She doesn't matter. He does. And yet, I stayed. And I built a life louder than their dismissal. People love tidy endings, the kind where the villain apologizes, the hero forgives, and everyone walks off holding hands. But this isn't one of those stories. This is the kind of story where the hero saves herself, where she doesn't return home because she made a new one, where justice isn't revenge, it's refusing to become what hurt you, where survival isn't the peak, it's the foundation. If any part of this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, unseen, or unloved by the very people who should have protected you, tell me below, not just where you're watching from, but who you are now. Because your story, like mine, isn't over yet. And maybe, just maybe, this is your beginning. Some nights I still wake up before sunrise, not from nightmares, not from fear. Just from a kind of stillness, the kind you earn after years of noise. I'll slip out of bed quietly, make a cup of tea, and step onto my balcony. Clover, half asleep, follows me out, curling up beside my feet. The lake reflects the early sky like glass, untouched, undisturbed. For a moment, I breathe in that silence. And I remember, not with pain, but with clarity. I remember the hospital lights, the coldness in their voices, the ache of realizing I was alone and choosing anyway to survive. I remember the bookstore, the grocery store budgets, the first key I ever turned to unlock a door that was mine. I remember Carson's eyes across the conference table, stunned, and how I didn't need his regret because I had already chosen myself long before he arrived. And I remember the letters, the ones I wrote, the ones I didn't. But most of all, I remember the moment I realized I no longer needed anyone else to give me permission to exist. If you're listening right now, wherever you are, whatever time it is, and you're wondering if you're strong enough to rewrite your story, you are. If you're wondering if healing without reconciliation is valid, it is. And if you're wondering if your voice matters even when it shakes, it does. So if this story stayed with you, if it moved something in your chest, subscribe, leave your thoughts, or just whisper, "I'm still here," because you are, and that alone is extraordinary.